Okay, so on to study two. Study two, I wanted to look specifically at the top 0.1% of experts. That is, these are people that make money playing the game. Oftentimes they are sponsored, have coaches, travel around the country on a weekly basis to have access to these tournaments, and are somewhat famous within the scene. I wanted to look at these skilled people and say, you know, what is it that predicts their success? Because obviously they've all practiced quite a bit. They've all been playing for many years. Maybe this is a place where something like emotion regulation or individual differences would really come through. So one major difference between top players and regular players is stress. Obviously, in order to play your best, no matter what level you are, you need to be consistent and avoid choking, which means managing your anxiety. But top players have a whole lot more anxiety than regular level players. Like I said, their tournament results are directly equivalent to their financial stability, their fan base, their sponsorships. Moreover, even when they're just playing a low stakes game where they're meant to win, they're much more likely to be publicly broadcast to those 120,000 viewers online, which huge performance pressure, right? So I wanted to look at stress management specifically. Surprise, in looking at stress management, I discovered that most of these players are at clinical levels of stress and depression. I ended up having to adjust my IRB because of this. I didn't realize I was working with a high-risk population. But compared to other people for their age and gender, these people are experiencing very much life stress, and very high depression ratings. The picture that I have here is a top player who is spiking his controller. So this teal thing, blur here, is a controller, and there's a very common reaction, one of the reactions within Smash to either something really exciting and good happening, or you getting really frustrated and mad, is literally throwing your controller on the ground. You know, these controllers, they don't make them anymore, so they're like $100 each, but you know what? There's nothing like standing up and chucking your equipment to the ground. In any case, controller spiking represents to me that emotions can be both very high, so you're so excited that you just won against somebody you never expected, so you're going to throw that controller, or they can be extremely negative, like you are going to quit this game, you hate everything, and you're going to throw your controller to express that. Okay. Oh, so one thing I forgot to say about this skill in top 100 is that not only did I do all of those surveys that that I did with the lower skilled players, but I also added a few other measures to get more detailed information. So I added additional surveys, extended surveys. I also interviewed everyone for an hour and a half, and I took their salivary cortisol samples. You might have noticed this talk was originally titled, it had the word physiological in it, because I am looking at how physiological stress management affects their performance day to day. However, because of COVID, I have not been able to go finish the assays. So I haven't been able to be on campus to get that data to you. So that won't be here today, but it was taken, and I'm hoping it will show some interesting things about stress management in these players. Okay, back to where we were. In the interviews, I asked a whole lot of questions, lay theories of skill, asked about their practice habits. One of the topics I covered was emotion regulation. And when it comes to emotion regulation, there seems to be 3 different camps within these top players. Very eloquent. If you can't keep your emotions in check, you're screwed. There are people, many of them, who think that emotion regulation is just important and just an integral component of competing at a top level. Especially people that have emotion regulation difficulties outside of Smash, they recognize the need for it within Smash. If I can't get back from being tilted, my performance is low. There's another camp, it's about 20%, I'd say, that believe that emotion regulation is not as important, that it is in fact second to play. This is from one of the top five players in the world, who says that most of his play is related to execution and not emotion regulation, and there just isn't enough time or energy to be doing that sort of thing. Another player in the top 100 says he doesn't regulate his emotions at all because there's no room for them. And finally, there's a third camp that talk about not really knowing until they got advice from mentors, coaches, and rivals. So one particular story stuck out to me where a player was talking to his mentor. They were the two best players at this local tournament, and so he's like, oh yeah, I'll see you in winners finals and then I'll come back. And his mentor pointed out, so you've already assumed that you're going to lose to me then in the first round we have to play each other. And having that sort of outside perspective, that kind of feedback about a very specific part of your play, your mindset or your emotion regulation, made all the difference for this player. And so there's something really important to be said about access to coaching and mentorship within a scene. All right, so looking at their emotion regulation was super interesting for me as a researcher interested in that topic, but I also wanted to return to these core questions of skill and talent and what things actually predict performance. So the top 100 is the only group that is ranked every year within this scene. Because of that, I can actually look at their growth across time, where I can't look at that with lower level players. So I wanted to know, based on some of these surveys I'm taking, what was their slope? What was the curve of their growth? You know, did they start out really strong and peter out? Have they just been consistently spiking up in the rankings since they began playing? And looked at a bunch of different things in those surveys, like competitive drive, fixed versus growth mindset, confidence, life stress, and practice habits, that sort of thing. So which of these things predict growth? This slide I'm going to show you is just a list, and then I'm going to give you an illustrative example. So the number of years you've played the game matter to your growth. How long you've been at a top level matter to your growth. Using reappraisal, which is considered a positive or effective emotion regulation strategy, and your perceived stress. Okay, so let's take an example here. Player A and player B are both ranked within the top 100. The intercept for this model was 102, so let's say they're ranked at 102. Player A has been playing for 3 years, player B has been playing for 6 years, which is about how long the ranking system has been around. Player B would be considered a veteran in the scene, and player A would be considered well-established. Because of that, player A would be 90th, ranked 90th, so again, here, smaller is better, and player B would be rank, 78th, right? So much higher, based on experience alone. There's also how much time you've been ranked previously. So how quickly and how well did you gain your skill? Again, if you've only been in the top 100 for a year, that predicts about 6 places up versus a player that's been in the top 100 for 4 years, 24. However, when it comes to emotion regulation or use of reappraisal strategy, it represents about 7 ranks per standard deviation difference. So if you are above the mean for use of reappraisal, you're going to perform better. You're going to end up at 83rd instead of 90th. Whereas if you're below the mean, that's going to hurt you. So player B here is, despite having much more years of experience at a high level, going to suffer because their reappraisal skill is low. And life stress also follows this pattern, where if you are a standard deviation above the mean for life stress, that really helps your performance. And if you have a lot going on outside of the game, that ends up predicting negative growth. Is that that your slope goes down instead. So in this example, in which player B theoretically is much more experienced, in this calculation, player B would actually end up lower, almost 10 ranks lower than player A. So player A, they have good emotion regulation and low life stress, and because of that, that bumps them above someone who's been playing 3 years longer than them. So when I look at this, I think to myself that, of course, talent and practice got them to where they are. But the social context, the emotional context, all of those things can really impact your entire career as a top player. And that's something that, based on the interviews, players aren't all familiar with or all on board with, that we need to be thinking about emotion regulation and stress in predicting performance. Okay, so to summarize, top 100 players are exposed to a lot of unique stressors, and that is probably correlated with their perceived stress and depression compared to the general population. Now, one might say, okay, this is correlational. It could be that depressed people are more likely to game. fair enough. It could be that people have poor reward processing regulation, and they only get a thrill out of gaming, and that draws them in. But I don't have the data to to necessarily speak to that point. But I do think that the unique stressors that they're facing must be considered when we think about why they have higher rates of stress and depression. So when it comes to skill acquisition, if I ask a player what makes somebody good, they're going to talk about practice and talent. When it comes to emotion regulation, people's opinions will vary based on their exposure to coaching or mentorship and their own motivation beliefs. So definitely an under-taught area within professional esports, emotion regulation is. And finally, growth among the top level players who have all put in very many hours and very many years to the game is impacted by their emotion regulation skills, life stressors, and experience altogether. Okay.